Hey, welcome to Razovskyville. Okay, so it's time for Razovskyville, as I've decided to call this weekly visit. And I'm Stuart Ross, and let's see how this goes this week. I'm trying to see if stuff's happening on my chat here. Oh, I see. My chat's over on that side. Okay. Oh, look, there we are. I'm on apparently. Okay, so my name is Stuart Ross, and I know some of you, if there is more than one of you there. I'm just going to collapse my chat tab over here. Hmm, I don't know. I don't know. Okay, we'll see what happens. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to start. So Razovskyville is me coming up here and reading stuff of mine from over the years, and maybe even stuff I haven't written yet. That's what I'll do. I'm going to have a future one where I'm going to read things that I haven't actually written yet. That might be really, really good. Um, so I am here in Flamboyant Studios in the basement of my home here in Coburg, Ontario. And the place I live in used to be a vintage clothing shop run by my mother-in-law, Carol Siblock. And so I got some neat things down here as a set. What else can I say before I start? I want to thank Lori Siblock for her help with the exquisite set design here. And I'm just going to try and, there's this little chat box over here, and I'm going to just try and get rid of it because it it's really distracting me. Okay, I don't think I can. Well, we'll see how it goes. Okay, so um, last week, you may remember, um, last week, I'm sorry, people are trying to make me laugh in their comments here already. So last week I read from a book called The Thing in Exile, which was published when I was 16 years old, but it was poetry I wrote when I was 15. Right around that time, I moved from the regular old school system into an alternative school up in North York and Toronto around Young and Shepherd. It was a school called the Alternative Independent Study Program, or AISP. And that is where I finally started meeting a lot more writers. And I was going to read you a little bit from this personal essay about my experience at AISP, and then I'll read some work that I wrote in that period and maybe up into my early 20s. Okay. Um, Here we go. Our first poetry teacher at ACE was an American-born poet named Sam F. Johnson, who was involved with a Toronto collective called the House Poets, which also included Alfred Rushton and the versifying police officer Hans Jawinski, author of the mass market paperback Poet Cop, Some Call Me Pig. Sam, with his short, wispy red beard, was a gentle guy and always very encouraging. He really knew his stuff. It was from him that I first learned about Robert Creeley and the Black Mountain School. And I realized that, in fact, thanks to Alessandro Porco, who's been making that aware on social media today, that in fact today is Robert Creeley's birthday. So there we go. One year, a local playwright and poet, Robin Fulford, taught a brilliant 8-week seminar called Evil in Literature. And in other years at ACE, we studied with Joe Rosenblatt, Victor Coleman, in the days when he went under the moniker Vic Dor, David Young and Robert Phones. All these guys were involved with Coach House Press, a bastion of then hippie and beatnik writers tucked in behind Rochdale College in downtown Toronto. And so we sometimes did workshops there. Up on the second floor of the coach house, around the wooden table, surrounded by shelves holding every book the press had ever published, including works by Americans Ron Padgett and Tom Veitch and Allen Ginsberg, Robert Creeley, Tom Clark, David Rosenberg, so many more. Well, we wrote and critiqued poems. Editors and writers and typographers and printers and binders walked in and out of the room, filling themselves with coffee from a cluttered kitchen alcove. We learned all about Bill Hutton and Fielding Dawson and Jack Spicer. It felt mystical then there, and it still does today in that room. Back at AISP, Mark and I once joined Joe Rosenblatt, who was spending a week-long teaching residency at AISP, for lunch in the building cafeteria. He ordered fried liver and onions. I was repulsed. Mark was excited. That's Mark Laba, by the way. Poet, lives in Vancouver now. And along with a couple of other students, Joe invited us to his place on Greensides, where he lived with his wife, Faye, in the mysterious St. Clair and Bathurst neighborhood, where my grandfather, Max Razovsky, once had a dry cleaning and alterations shop. To address subscription envelopes for his cultural magazine, Jewish Dialogue, Joe fed us Ritz crackers and beer. We were like 16 years old or 15 years old or something at the time. In our writing class, around a big boardroom table on the second floor of the building on Oakburn Crescent, he dismissed everyone's writing except Mark's. And he photocopied Mark's poems and passed the copies around to the rest of us. This was what poetry sounded like, he said, and he published a bunch of Mark's poems in Jewish Dialogue. That was a bit tough for me, I got to admit. The first day of his residency, I remember, he went through a heap of poems by each of us. I must have brought about 40 pages. Nothing worth salvaging here. Nothing here. Nope, he muttered as he flipped through my yellow foolscap sheets, until he hit on a poem called Ritual of the Concrete Penguins. This is the poem you'll be working on this week. That's what Joe said to me. I was stunned. I wrote several poems a day. Was I really going to work on only one poem this week? Joe proceeded to scribble out half the lines before pushing the sheet back across the table to me. Ritual of the Concrete Penguins became a much better poem that week, and then I didn't write anything for a year and a half. I was so traumatized. I'm going to go on a little bit here because I also got involved in this poetry workshop, mostly with adults, around the same time. So I'm just looking at some of the notes here. Okay, nothing I have to. I hope Merlin, it's so good to see you, Merlin Homer, and I hope you are not still hearing two versions in time-lapse fashion. I'll try to only talk out one side of my mouth, see if that fixes it. For Mark Lab and me, our literary adventures in high school were the beginnings of our immersion into the larger Toronto literary community. The growth from kid writer to writer in a community happened pretty organically. We were chosen to participate in a literary conference designed for high school students taking place down at Harbourfront, which was then little more than a single converted industrial building on the lake where arts events happened. George Miller, a dashing, intellectual, rail-thin poet with a voice deeper than Dylan Thomas's, led a workshop for us there. Or did a reading, I don't remember. But George soon formed a weekly workshop we attended. It was populated by a few of his high school students and a whole bunch of adults. A weekly series also grew out of George's workshop, the Axle Tree Coffee House, which took place on Saturday nights at Trinity Church behind the Eaton Center. Lots of neat writers came through there. It was, I guess, our scene. Mark and I were pretty precocious in those days, maybe even pretentious. We occasionally stood up at the workshop table and inflicted our wacko sound poetry on the group. Rosemary Aubert and Brian Purdy were members of the workshop, as were Heather Cadsby. If you're watching, Heather, hello. Kevin LaRoche, Julian O'Neill, and Bev Dario. A lot of them went on to publish books of their work, while others also became publishers. There was a real madman named David Wright. He read an acid-inspired love poem in which he had something like, "I want to lick your eyeballs." I, a teenager, was shocked. There was also a guy named Arnold who came in one day with his head shaved. He'd quit his job and might have left his family too, I don't quite remember. And he asked to be called from then on Shadrach the Prophet. He announced that he was writing an epic poem about Toronto. I remember him reading about 900 pages of it once. Mark and I looked at each other. We were bored. Anyway, that was sort of as I flowed into my teens. And when I was about 19 years old, I was learning about all these amazing poets and getting more aware of small presses. I'd found Dave McFadden's Night and Dried Plums up at the library up around Yonge and Sheppard. And that blew me away. It taught me so much. And around the same time, I found a copy of a book called Toujours l'Amour by Ron Padgett, which was another life-changing book for me. Anyway, I decided at one reading at the Axle Tree Coffee House that I was going to, hey, Linda Crossfield, hi. Sorry, I'm so distracted. I'm so excited to see all these people here. I wish we were sitting around in person. So I was doing a reading at the Axle Tree Coffee House, and I thought, okay, I'm going to publish something. So I went to my dad's office, and with his typewriter and his photocopier, I made a little unstapled 12-page chapbook. I think I was 19 at this point, and it's right over here. I hope you can see it because I can no longer actually see my screen. It's called He Counted His Fingers, He Counted His Toes, with a little drawing by me on the cover. And this is the first thing I'm going to read to you from. So this is published in 1979, April 1979. Oh, I numbered them. This is number 9 of 50 copies. And I remember that day I sold 7 copies of the book at chapbook at 50 cents each. No. I sold 13 copies at 50 cents each. So that gave me $6.50, which was enough to buy a huge feast at Kwang Chow's, a great Chinese restaurant in behind the Toronto City Hall. So the most hideous poem in here is the one I'm going to read first tonight. And it's called Vicious Obituary for Sid Vicious, 1957 to 1979, Sex Pistol and the Man Who Made My Way Immortal. Filled with grace, this is filled to the brim with grace, the fucking brim with grace, overflowing with grace, over fucking flowing with grace. Let me out, there's too much grace round here for me. Yes, let me out now. I've had quite enough of grace. Grace Kelly, gracious goodness, grazing cows. Let me out because this place is filled with too fucking much grace. So I guess I went from my innocent 14, 15-year-old poems to my punk phase, which lasted for one poem. So here's the poem that I referenced in that little memoir piece, Ritual of the Concrete Penguins. I was so proud of this. I think this is the poem where I thought I'm actually a poet, though I still wouldn't admit that to people for another 25 years or so. Ritual of the Concrete Penguins. In the darkest Antarctic night, the penguins leave their nests and begin their somber march to the penguin ritual ground, the rhythmic beat of their wings like the mumbled prayers of 1,000 monks. That could have been my first simile, I suspect. Fun and frivolity completely forgotten, the black and white pilgrims sway in their determined harmony. The flightless birds arrive and begin to flap their useless wings as their mad lamentations echo into the darkest Antarctic night. The pagan wind begins to howl, the ground begins to rumble, and towering concrete penguins emerge, smashing the glacial air. Slowly at first, then faster, they flap their massive wings, and then into the trembling heavens ascends the flight of the concrete penguins. So there you go. Holly Potter and Brian from Montreal. So nice to see you there. All right. Hey, Vicky. It's so good to see you. You do so much for poetry over on Twitter. Thanks for being here too. I can't keep track of everyone who's on, so I wish I could just sit here and name all of you and say nice things about our connections. So I'm going to read this poem, which I have not read aloud again in, probably 40 years. But I remember being really proud of it. It looks sort of different on the page from Ritual of the Concrete Penguins. There's Ritual of the Concrete Penguins. There's this other one called Get Your Stinking Paws Off Me, Father Time. This vast stretch of dry dirt, dead, flower picked, dead, air inhaled. And then about 3 miles south, as the crow magnon flies, dragonflies sucked inside out and resettled in the Arctic wasteland, land of only 2 times. Remember the time we... And how about the time we... And above, as the clock strikes 8, vast death, vast space, looking through the wrong end of a one-ended telescope, making life and death decisions at the drop of a pin. Buck Rogers, hurtling through the time warp, said, I think it's yesterday. Now, then, Buck. And looking at his watch, Buck found himself suddenly ageless, floating. I think I'm immortal, at least for a while, he said, and picked a flower, a dead flower picked, and placed it between his teeth, and took a hyperspace pencil from his pocket, and took some interstellar paper from his pouch, and wrote a letter to his mum. Dearest mother, you'll probably receive this letter before I write it. I'm floating now through deep space, the only sound my heart pounding, but each beat is so slow, mother, that I imagine they'll never run out. And I've got it from high sources that I'm immortal now. Something tells me, though, that I won't be back. Remember the time we... And how about the time we give my love to Dad and my Mickey Mouse watch to Sis, if she hasn't already taken it? I could write forever, but I should probably go now. The journey will be a long one. Love, Buck. Then Buck Rogers knelt for the first of many times and planted the dead flower in a black hole. A tear fell from Mighty Buck's left eye, and when it landed, he was nowhere in sight. That was a really serious poem. That's a wild long poem. I can't believe I wrote that. That's really weird. Okay, so let's just see if anything else here I need to respond to. No. Hey, Lorianne Fuhr in Calgary. It's nice to see you too, or to see your name right there. So it was around that time that I met Crad Kolodny. Crad was a really, really eccentric, weird, interesting fiction writer who was selling his books out on Yonge Street. He was one of the first two people to do that. Him and a poet named Don Garner, I think, came out the same year. Don Garner was a really, really sweet guy and a not very good poet. Crad Kolodny was a weird, grumpy, interesting guy, and sometimes a really brilliant fiction writer, and sometimes a really terrible fiction writer. But he was out there selling books on the street, and I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to sell books on the street too. So I talked to Crad about who printed his books, and I did my first book, and I can't actually find the version that I printed back then, but I had a bunch of extra insides of the book from the printer, and J.W. Curry, uh, who I met in the street when I was selling, but like years later, I met so many people in the street when I was selling. I met J.W. Curry there for the first time. I met Michael Dennis, who's become perhaps my dearest friend when I was selling books on the street. So many comrades I made when I was selling my books on the street with signs around my neck saying, writer going to hell, buy my books, shabby no-name writer, buy my books, Canadian writer, actual size, all sorts of things. Anyway, I did a book called Bad Glamour, and I don't have a copy. I can't find a copy of it right now, but I did find a copy of this special edition that J.W. Curry did. He made these new covers. Can you see that okay there? Again, I can't see what's on the screen, but there it is. Rubber stamped, and this, I don't know how he did this thing. Oh, it's on a little sticker on there. And he reproduced pretty much the cover of Bad Glamour, but he replaced the little line drawing I had with this other unusual thing. And then on the back, it says this, which it did say on the back of the other one. It was a little quote I got from a magazine called Glamour. Anyway, I published 1,000 copies of this, and I stood it out in Yonge Street, starting when I was about 20 years old. I was a York University student then. I was working at the school newspaper, where I met Elliot Lefko, who became a really important person in my life too, and quite a few people. I met Gary Barwin through the university newspaper a few years later as well. Kevin Conley, so many people. Anyway, I did this book. I stood out in the street. I sold them for $2 a pop, and I'm going to read you some of it. There was one poem which was the one I loved performing. It was so pretentious and everything, but I really, really love performing it. And so I'm going to read that one now. I, again, probably haven't read it aloud in 4 decades or something. In Spain, 1936, a melodrama for Ernest. Can you stand, she asked. You stand, she asked. I heard, I said, I will try, will try. I said, I tried, can't stand, I said. Stand up. She asked, can you stand, stand the pain, she asked. The pain, can't stand, the pain, can't stand up. To pain, I said. Can't you, she said, she asked. Can you still kiss, kiss me, she asked. I said my lips, lips burn. I burn for you, I said. For me, she said. I said I cannot, but I cannot kiss. Stand up to kiss. Can't kiss you, I said to her. She said, can't you, you stand, stand up. Stand pain, kiss me. I laughed. I said, this wound. She said, where, wound, where? I said, here, here in my chest, wound in my chest. I said, I pointed and said, I lay in her arms, a wound in my chest. She said, "Who put this wound in your chest? Was it?" She asked. "Was it the butler?" She asked. "What butler?" I said. "The butler," she said again. "No." She said, "Was it? Was it a memory of something?" I thought. I said, "I thought it was, but don't talk," she said. "Why don't you die? Die now," she said. I smiled. She said, "Now you can die." I smiled. She said, "Here in my lap in pain, lips burning, don't talk. Die, die, die. Die now," she said. Here, die now." I smiled. I closed my eyes. I remembered, I said. I said this wound. I said the memory. She smiled and said, "Just die. Die now." She smiled. I smiled and died. Yeah, so that was in Spain, 1936. I also, in my first three chapbooks that I sold out in the street, I did an unusual thing, which is that I put poetry and fiction in there as well. And I'm going to read you, I think I'm going to read you a short story, a very short story. Where is it? Oh, yeah, it's called The Murder. A lot of death. There was a lot of death in this book. Okay. The Murder. "What a way to go," said Bolton, looking down at the twisted body whose hands still clutched the ice pick that pierced its head at the ears. "It must have been extremely painful," Mr. Esco agreed. "His mouth still remains open as his final words are lost in the molecules of this room." Bolton pulled the sheet over the dead man's face and looked to Mr. Esco. "They thought they'd be able to see an image of Jack the Ripper in the eyes of his victims." He paused for a moment, running his fingers back through his thick black hair, then continued, "But as each of them peered into the dead women's eyes, they saw only themselves and immediately handcuffed their own wrists. In this way, the entire London police force was incapacitated, and Jack was left to commit his murders in peace." "Fascinating," remarked Mr. Esco, returning his notebook to his pocket and wiping the sweat from the back of his neck. "It's a warm day, Bolton. Let us leave before poor Mr. Piles begins to decorate the air." The two of them turned and walked towards the door. On the way, they passed a coffee table with a telephone on it. Mr. Esco stooped over to make a call. As he spoke quietly into the receiver, Bolton wandered to a wall to look at some photographs. There was one of a small baby, and one of Terence Piles in his graduation gown. And there was Piles again, standing with his wife at their wedding. Bolton said aloud, "Each of these pictures marks a beginning. A small rise in the graph, a heartbeat or two skipped. Behind me lies a picture that is an ending, a stalk that has crashed, a waterfall." He looked around and saw that his fly was undone. The zipping sound as he did it up had a certain finality to it. "Like signing the bottom of a document," he said to himself softly. Ernest Esco hung up the phone and approached Bolton. The two of them peered long and hard into each other's eyes, and 1 hour later, as their vision became obscured and the sun set on the bleak horizon, Bolton finally said, "Shall we turn ourselves in?" The two men joined their arms at the elbows, not by some sort of surgical operation, but simply by interlocking them. And then they set out into the foggy streets. And I'm going to read one more poem from this book because it feels to me that it's a bit of a connecting poem from those poems I wrote when I was 15 and I was reading a lot of Stephen Crane and stuff and E. Cummings and up into the poems that I began writing later. So this is called "The Pig Snouts Lay Weeping." The pig snouts lay weeping in the window of a Chinatown butcher shop. They lay with their grief-stricken comrades on a cold metal tray, and somewhere there's a bunch of pigs, pigs with incomplete faces, hanging on rusty meat hooks in deserted warehouses. Somewhere. Oh, you stupid swine, if only you had gone to college and become truffle sniffers. So this is well before I learned that you shouldn't end poems with like punchlines and stuff. But there you go. Charles Tiddler out in Vancouver. How great to see you here. Interestingly, I met Charles, I think, around the time that I went to Vancouver to visit Pulp Press, and I typeset one of my books that I'm going to read from in a little bit. So I'm going to read a little bit more from the next book. I'm also going to mention, and I'm just going to mention that this once. Oh, hey, here's my cat. Come here, Simone. Come here. Oh, this is Luminous Simone of Petui. And hey there. She looks good on. She's very photogenic, I think. Anyway, there she is. All right, so I was going to just mention this once, that if you feel like sending a little tip, if it's something you're in a position to do, I would gladly receive it. So I just really want to make use of that cash register too. So, and I want to thank. I was really surprised last week afterwards to see that people actually did. Some people actually tipped me, and I really, really appreciate it. Those of you who are in a position to do that and you feel moved to, that's pretty cool. So thanks. And all the rest of you who are here and don't or can't or whatever, I'm so grateful that you're here. I was at Crad Kolodny's place one day. We used to go over. I used to go over there and used to play chess, and he'd make really terrible chicken, and he'd show me his porn magazines. One of them had a woman with 3 breasts, which I think was some kind of fake photography thing. But anyway, I said to Crad, I don't know what to call my next chapbook. And he said, well, you gave me that poem earlier today to look at, and I think that's the title, When Electrical Sockets Walked Like Men. And so that was my second chapbook there. From Proper Tales Press, my little tiny press. Oh, let's see. Hey, Lisa Richter said about that last punchline, it's not too punchy a punchline. And I think that's pretty cool. And Maria Erskine, hi there. Patui is not like the Patui of spitting, but the Ptuj Patui, which is a city in Slovenia, which is a fantastic place. Josh Dorff in New York. I hope you're well. I hope you're taking care. I hope you're wearing a mask. And I think there's a little PayPal address somewhere that should be visible to you. PayPal me / Razovsky, I think is what it is. Anyway, it's not compulsory. Okay, enough of that. I'm going to read another short story. This is a lot of short stories in this one. Should I read this? Maybe it's a bit long. Yeah, I'm going to skip that one. Okay, because we're running out of time already. Angry Bill rides into Monotony Ranch. I'm not going to read that. Captain Earmuff and his little party. That's not a bad one. I'll read the title story from this, title poem, I should say. When electrical sockets walked like men. Over the rocks, parched fields, blew mist, dark mist, and from beneath the earth, a constant drone, a noisy silence. Great winged creatures with iron beaks and iron claws screeched high above, searched high for prey. Dwarfed reptiles with glistening eyes and nasal belch left moistened trails behind spiked tails. And where was Hedy Lamarr? A question left unasked, because no one was there to ask it. These were the days when death was nothing new, when fear was but a whimper in an empty bush, when electrical sockets walked like men. So that's one story. So this book, by the way, is from 1981. So I was like 22 years old then. And it starts with a little epigraph by Mervyn Peake, who was a huge hero of mine when I was a teenager and my early 20s, from a poem, I think, called The Weird Journey. It says, enough it seemed to me that I was on my way after years of stillness. I was too young to have actually had years of stillness. The first poem in this book, in fact, is again Ritual of the Concrete Penguins. I think I'm not going to read anything else from this one, and I'm going to move on a little bit. No, I'm not going to read. No, that's it. There's one story with a character named Jerry Alfred, which is obviously a play on Alfred Jerry. Absolute genius that I could come up with that variation on the name Alfred Jerry, the great surrealist. And also, I see that I introduced a couple of characters here. Dr. Elmo Steinholtz, European specialist, and in this poem here, I'll read this one. I place on the table the red and white cloth, and on this I put my typewriter, its heart faintly fluttering. White mask on face, I wash my hands and glove them. And to this table I wheel a tray containing my instruments and begin to pick at the machine, its tabulator, its backspace, its 11-foot intestine. My God, Dr. Steinholtz, it's hemorrhaging, I yell and pour ketchup on my hands. We must destroy it quickly, my eyes are wide. Picking up the baseball bat, I smash the thing to fragments. I wipe my brow, take off my mask. Steinholtz, I'm sorry. Something went wrong. But Steinholtz knows. So that's from When Electoral Sockets Walk Like Men. And then, yeah, so we're getting into about 1982, and I just want to mention that in 1982, I started up a little magazine, and it was called Mondo Hunkamuga, a journal of small press reviews, and it later became called Mondo Hunkamuga, a journal of small press stuff. And I think I published it for about 20 years and did about 22 issues, but the first bunch of issues were like that. And this is actually an interview with the beloved and wonderful BP Nickel on the cover. BP Nickel talks about consumer resistance. And I did some comics too. There's a little comic strip by me in the back. I hope you can see that. And I also had a contributor named Brent Davis, who was actually me. That was my first pseudonym, Brent Davis, who did a column on small mags. And here's Mark Laba doing a review of Yummy Fur Comics by Chester Brown. And what else do we have here? So Robert Sword is reviewed. And let's see. Oh, The Burger Joint Was Closed. The Burger Joint Was Closed by Ajay Hebbel, who was a small presser in those days. He did that little chapbook, and he was selling it out in the street for a little while. He now runs the Jazz Festival in Guelph, I believe. Dennis Turbin is reviewed here as well by a guy named Daniel Kirschman. Dennis Turbin, who is a dear friend of my dear friend Michael Dennis in Ottawa. Peggy Leffler is reviewed by BP Nickel. Anyway, and in the middle is an editorial by Jim Smith called One Poetry Special to Go, with a great drawing by my friend John Enns, who also did the cover of a couple of Proper Tales press books in those days. Let's back up to 1982. The book I am perhaps most embarrassed about. Father, the Cowboys Are Ready to Come Down from the Attic. So, hey, Carol Ann, I really appreciate Carol Ann Bell-Smith, who is a wonderful person and a really fine poet, who's got a really great book of minimalist poetry coming out shortly. She tells me how many people are on, because I can't see how many people are on, and it's nice to see there's, I don't know, 46 or 47 people on. Anyway, okay, so let's see. Father the Cowboys Ready to Come Down from the Attic was written, the first novel that I wrote as part of the Pulp Press 3-day novel writing contest, where you had to literally write a novel, conceive of and write a novel in 72 hours. I'm thinking that it's very possible that I wrote at least some of this in the window of the St. Rosedale Library, which was Charlie Huskin and Dan Bazuin's fantastic bookstore downtown Toronto. Maybe it was on Queen Street at that time. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think I was in there, and Paul Corrington was there, and one other person. And maybe if Charlie remembers, he'll type it up there. Who was that other person? Somebody who always dressed in black. Anyway, so I wrote this novel, and I'm sort of embarrassed by it. And I'm going to read a little segment from it, because I was going through it earlier to see is there anything I could bear to read in here. And I promised Alessandro Porco I would read a bit of this. So it's basically about a very, very wealthy Bay Street businessman in Toronto who has a wife and a son, and he has 4 actual 19th century cowboys locked in his attic. That's the cover, by the way. That's my drawing there, a little silhouette, my only ever silhouette drawing. Okay, so here we go. So this is Nero, who's the son, Philip Wentworth's son, Nero Wentworth. Finally, he can't stand it that there's these cowboys up there. He wants to free them, but he's under the thumb of his father. And he goes to school, and he confesses and tries to get some help. Back in the suburbs, in Nero's school, the entire third grade class had fallen into near hysteria, giggling uncontrollably and pounding on their miniature wooden desks. Even the teacher couldn't help grinning as she tried to be patient with little Nero. She'd met up with some pretty weird kids in her day, but this one took the cake. Some of the boys were flinging elastic band propelled paper clips at him, and others pummeled him with spitballs. Nero used his arms and books to shield himself. In your attic, repeated Miss Boog. Bats in your belfry, bats in your belfry, chanted the Porker twins from the back of the room. We'll get you after class, Wentworth, ha ha ha, yelled out Boney O'Reilly from his seat near the window. All right, children, that's enough, shouted the teacher. Things are going too far. Gradually, the laughter and taunting subsided into a few stifled chuckles. Nero, why would you say something like that? You certainly do have a strong imagination. But it's true, Miss Boog. There's 4 of them, and they're starving. The teacher smiled. Now, why would they be starving? Don't they eat? No, said Nero, almost pleadingly. Only beans once in a while, maybe every 3 or 4 days, whenever my father cooks up a batch. And you'd like me to phone your father and tell him to let them out? Asked Miss Boog. A scatter of squeals escaped hand-covered mouths as the class awaited Nero's reply. I'd really appreciate it, Miss Boog, because they don't mean any harm. They never did. They just want to go home. They have families. The teacher was now standing by the PA system. She flicked a switch. Hello, Mary? This is Sylvia in 110. I'm sending over one of my students now. Maybe you should just let him lie down for a while. I think he's having some problems at home. She smiled at Nero and motioned for him to go. The boy slowly left the classroom, tears pouring down his face. The rest of the students watched on in silence. Okay, class, Nero will be feeling much better in no time at all. I think we should be very nice to him. But right now, let's sing a little song. Miss Boog sat down at the piano, rolled back her sleeves, and planted her fingers into a C major 7th. And then there's a little time break, and I did a clever thing because I have Miss Boog sitting down to play a song, but then we go up into the attic where one of the cowboys, his name is Levon, presumably named after Levon Helm, and he's playing a harmonica, and he sings a little song that starts the next section, which I'll just read the song. We have traveled many trails, and there's many trails more, but our bodies went out swimming, and our brains have washed ashore. Oh, our brains have washed ashore. So that's from Father the Cowboy's Ready to Come Down from the Attic. I think it has a few good moments. It has a lot of things that are really embarrassing. And this is the book when I was standing out in the street and this woman came up and started asking me questions and looked in the book and said, and I said, are you a writer too? And she said, yeah. And I said, oh, what do you write? Because I always ask people this. What do you write? She said, I write fiction. And I said, have you had anything published? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, what's your name? Maybe I've seen something by you. And she said, Alice Munro. And then she bought this book by me for $3 and went with it. And it was so embarrassing. I should point out that this also has a little introduction by Tom Walmsley, great Canadian writer, and also has a back cover blurb by D.M. Fraser, and they were both involved with Pulp Press, where I typeset this out in Vancouver, my first trip out there. I do want to mention that I'm wearing this Western shirt in honor of Father the Cowboy's Ready to Come Down from the Attic, and I got it from Little Underground in downtown Cobourg. So if you're in downtown Cobourg, visit my friends Matt and Joan and spend lots of money at Little Underground. They've got hand sanitizer at the door, so should be fairly safe in there. And I also want to mention that I'm going to do some more commercials for Cobourg. Jennifer Bogart, who's on here, and thank you for being here, Jennifer, has a great little indie bookstore in town, and they are wonderful at getting all the really weird ass books I asked them to special order for me. So I see I'm getting close to 45 minutes, and I don't want to go much further than that. And so let's see. I just want to keep saying hello to people, but I'll say hello to you all after. I'm going to read a little tiny bit more. And then if you have a few questions, I will answer them. And I think this sort of wraps up this era. Maybe I won't read from this. Maybe I'll just read one thing. I was pretty proud of this cover because I did use some neat typefaces. I was by this time a typesetter, at Excalibur, York University's newspaper. So I typeset all my chapbooks there. This is called Skip and Biff Cling to the Radio, Proper Tales Press, 1984. And I'm very proud of that drawing. I used to know how to draw back then. And let me just see, maybe I'll read one little thing. Oh, I'm going to read this one. You know, this poem was another person I met on the street in those early days, probably around 1982, was a guy named Richard Huddle, who was a writer from Chicago, who was there on his honeymoon and in Toronto on his honeymoon, and he came walking by me, and he stopped and he bought a book and we got to talking, and he wrote me a letter later, and we became really, really, really great friends. And Richard was a fantastic poet. He passed away but a little over a year ago. But this is one poem of mine that he really loved. So I'm going to send this out to Richard. It's called Modern Times. This subway, it actually moves, and with me in it. When it stops, I get out, and then I go up moving stairs. That's right, an escalator. When I reach the top, I go outside, and there are so many people that I become one of them. But I don't get to choose which one I become. Oh, life, you're such a gamble. That's probably a good place to end my readings. And I'm just going to show you a couple of things. I started publishing other writers around 1982, and I'm going to show you what I published, a little bit of what I published through Proper Tales Press, because I think there's sort of interesting selections. So I published, I think it's the very first chapbook by Mark Laba, with a cover by Mark Laba called Movies in the Insect Temple. And it's got a nice little back cover drawing by Mark too. Movies in the Insect Temple. I once got an order from this book from a Department of Entomology, University of British Columbia. Really brilliant, crazy, surreal poems. I published a book by another friend I met at York University, who was in, I think he's in Vancouver. No, he was in Toronto, then Vancouver and Montreal. Really great novelist and wrote really great prose poems. And this is called Hit by a Rock. I did some illustrations, and I wish I could spend time reading some of these to you, because Michael was, what a unique voice he has. Great writer, great guy. And also, let's see, oh, Lillian Nechikov and Crunch. So Lillian and I were dating. We dated for most of my 20s. And this is her chapbook, and Crunch, with a drawing by her on the cover. And she was a great poet then, and she's an even greater poet now. There's a poem here called After Shea, Before Scrambled Eggs, 1980. And then a few Americans that I got into publishing. I published John M. Bennett, Columbus, Ohio. He's still doing stuff, and he does these weird visual poems too that look like this. And it was a crazy thing to be publishing 1,000 copies of books that like this that I couldn't possibly sell. There was a guy named Randall Brock in Spokane, Washington. Wrote these amazing minimalist poems, but he used almost the same vocabulary for all, for thousands of poems. A little book here with a drawing by Mark Laba called Shadows of Seclusion by Randall Brock. And there's Mark's portrait of Randall. I used to talk to Randall a lot on the phone. He was a pretty troubled guy, but a really great guy. And one other was a guy, I think he was American born, but he was out in BC, a guy named Wayne Ewing. Again, a Mark Laba drawing on this cover, The Transparent Neighbor. I don't know what's become of Wayne, but what a great poet he was. And that's my story of my whole beginning of my chapbook life. So Mallory Fuhr in New York, in Brooklyn, or wherever you are, it is so great to see you there. Mallory is a really great poet who hasn't published much poetry, and a spectacular songwriter. She is Grasping Straws. You should check them out on YouTube. And along with her partner, Marcus Kitchen, they do amazing music under another band name, which has the word midnight in it. Midnight Mischief, that's it. I'm just going to stay on for another few. Thanks, Mallory. Yeah, any questions that anyone might have? Because I'll answer a few questions. I'll just stick on for another 5 minutes, maybe, because we've gone almost 45 minutes now. I'll look back and see if any questions appeared. Let's see. uh, Alice Burdick points out that in Nova Scotia, proper tails is pronounced propa tails. So that's very exciting to hear that. Can I read one of the minimalist poems? Asks Carol Ann Judd Bell Smith, and I will. So one of, I assume you mean Randall Brock's minimalist poems. Yeah, I haven't opened this book in so many years. Um, this is called Dream. You who eat, do clouds test your humor? Does dark sleep make a demand at your door? Randall really, really had an amazing gift. Um, he published dozens and dozens and dozens of chapbooks through presses all over the place. I think that he died about a decade ago. I'm not really sure. I sort of lost track of him. One more called Joy by Randall Brock. If two people were joyous, the event would make humor die on its side. It's Randall Brock. Um, there's a guy here, Nick Selig. He says, thanks for sharing great work and what a history to have working on my first chapbook. I'm so glad that people are still doing chapbooks, and it sounds like you're doing your own chapbook. I love that. I think everyone should publish, whether they do a leaflet or chapbooks. I think the experience of publishing your own work, standing behind your own work, and taking responsibility for it in that way, and learning what it is to take it from manuscript into typeset pages and print them, whether it's on a photocopier or like a Stetner, uh, and or taking it to a print shop or on your computer printer, whatever. I think it's an amazing experience. So I wish you great success with your first chapbook there, Nick. Brian Smith. Brian Smith is such a neat guy. He's I think maybe now retired teacher. Um, and I'm going to get it wrong where he's from, somewhere that starts with a W near London, Ontario. Damn, I can't remember. John Chardy wants me to ask, because I think this is the name of one of John Chardy's books, how does a poem mean? And I'm happy to tell you about that, my feeling anyway. I think the how a poem means, I like that because it says that it's the poem that brings the meaning, not the poet. I think a poem means through all sorts of fluctuations throughout its life. The poet may have an intention or no intention. I write without intention, generally speaking. And the poem takes its own personality as you write it, and other people read it, and maybe they find meaning if meaning's a thing that they look for. I don't look for meaning myself, but people have their own lives, their own backgrounds, their own histories, uh, a history of what they've read, the history of what they've gone through, and they bring that to a poem. And it might be an intellectual meaning that it brings them. It might be a visceral, emotional meaning. Just might. I'm thinking of meaning as being reaction or response as well. And for the poet, I think the poet only learns about um, their poems later on. Maybe they think something while they're writing it, and then a week later they notice things they didn't notice, and then maybe 10 or 15 years later they still are noticing things. Or someone writes a review of their work, as happened to me last week. Um, and in Vallum, there was a review of my book Motel of the Opposable Thumbs, and I learned so much from the reviewer, whose name I really apologize for not remembering at this moment. But it was such a perceptive, interesting, enthusiastic review, so I'm grateful for it. But I learned so much from it. The things that reviewer found in my work was really exciting. So I think a poem's meaning is always changing, and is always changing within its various readers. So I think that's how a poem means. Woodstock, Brian Smith, Woodstock, of course. I visited, it's called Avenue, I feel like it was called Avenue High School or something in Woodstock. Brian brought me there. And Brian, it was one of the most energetic, exciting, challenging, creative teachers. It was amazing the things he threw at his student. It was a lot of fun visiting Brian's class. So thanks, Brian. Thank you for being here. That's really, really nice of you. Um, so a few other people are saying they're going to do chapbooks. That's very, very exciting. Jay Ross in Victoria. That would be exciting. I didn't even know that you wrote. So that's doubly exciting. Um, So if anyone publishes a chapbook, you can send them my way, and I will send you a chapbook. But it'll probably take me years because I'm so terrible at responding to mail. Michael Freeman, who I haven't seen in so many years, lives in downtown Toronto near the Harvard Bakery, I believe, or used to. Michael is a really, really fine prose poet. Reminds me a little bit sometimes of Russell Edson, a little bit of James Tate. Cigarette Salad, I think, was one of his books, and he said I was an inspiration for him in his little self-publishing ventures. You can still, every once in a while, find a Michael Freeman book around. I think he did two of them. And Cigarette Salad was one of them, I'm pretty sure. And he was just a great guy, and I haven't seen you in 15 years, Michael, or something. It's really nice that you're here. I'm just going to answer one or two more questions. Gary Barwin has asked me 700 questions here. Oh, College Avenue Secondary School was the school in Woodstock. Thanks, Brian. I have great memories of that. Let's see. Gary Barwin says, oh, he only asked 2 questions. I thought he'd asked hundreds, but I'm wrong. Can you talk about making up titles and character names? Titles for me are one of the most enjoyable things. Sometimes I create a title and then that title sits around for a while because I really, really want to write something under that title. One such title was something like, it opened up one of my books a few years ago, Before the Event, but After the Thing Happened, something like that. And I put that down in a notebook and I really wanted to use it. Sometimes I scribble down titles. That's the only kind of notes I really do. And eventually something ends up under that title. I almost always start with a title. And I do like to have weird titles. I like titles that challenge the idea of, poetry books with titles, Speaking of Men and Angels, or those kinds of real poetry titles. I've named my books things like my first book was called The Inspiration Cha-Cha. My first book with a spine, my first poetry book with a spine. Farmer Gloomy's New Hybrid, which got shortlisted for the Trillium Award in 2000, and I got to hear the Conservative Minister of Culture announcing my book at a party at the Royal Ontario Museum, and I had the pleasure of seeing this the Conservative Minister of Culture say the words "Farmer Gloomy's New Hybrid." I think that titles are such an opportunity to be really creative. One of the worst titles I ever did was for my second 3D novel, which was Wooden Rooster. How did I end up with that? Wooden Rooster. My novel Snowball Dragonfly Jew was first called The Snowball, and then it became The Snowball and the Dragonfly, and then it became Snowball Dragonfly Jew. And I'm really attracted to interesting titles, and I often hope that the book lives up to it. I'll mention this. He counted his fingers, he counted his toes. That title came from, I met John Curry. Maybe John was one of my first friends to have a child. I think he was probably 18 or 19 when he and his then partner Peggy Leffler had a child. And he told me that the first thing he did when he saw his first baby was he counted her fingers and toes to make sure they were all there. So I was amazed by that. He counted his fingers, he counted his toes. So that is that question. And I'm going to just jump ahead and see if there's anything left. Lisa Richter, who I believe has her second book coming out, a really fine poet who I met through my workshops, a Toronto poet, really interesting, more confessional work. She asked if I will ever do a poetry boot camp online. I will never do a poetry boot camp online, but I'm thinking I might do little 45-minute workshops, free workshops, and those will be coming up sometime soon if I can get my act together. I'm such a Luddite. So I think that's probably about it. I'm just going to, I'm trying to figure out what to do for my third Razovskyville. And because I don't want to keep just going in order. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll figure it out. And if you have any ideas, you let me know. And I think that's about it. I just want to thank you all so much. There's so many things I want to respond to here, but it would be very boring for you to sit and listen to me responding to things. This has been a blast. It has been so weird reading these early chapbooks of mine. So strange. And okay, one more little question here. Connie Clayton, uh, who is a dear friend and a sometimes sound poetry collaborator, a very, very fine poet with about 8,000 books coming out all and chapbooks coming out all at once, said, you said your most embarrassing book. What is your proudest? Um, the book I am most proud of, I mean, usually it's my most recent book, so Motel of the Opposable Thumbs, the poetry book, I'd say. But I think if I look back at my books, I think the book I'm probably most proud of is my novel, Snowball Dragonfly Jew, which was one of my first real experiments in writing fiction, sort of that was autobiography put through a funhouse mirror to some degree. It was sort of a book written for my mom, and I think it's a really, really fine book. I don't say that about my books, but I'm really, really proud of that book. Snowball Dragonfly Jew, published by ECW Press around 2012, maybe something like that. Um, Again, thank you all. It's been so nice to be here with you. And this weird thing, I should mention, I did have one little prop here, and I don't see what's happened to it. I had a mask that I was going to put on. Let me just see if I can find it. I chose it just for you. No, I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Yeah, I was going to wear a mask again, like last week, because I think it's best to wear a mask in these pandemic days. But I felt that, again, seeing my facial expressions is so important and will enrich you so much that it's worth it if some of you croak um, because I'm not wearing a mask. Just It's just a thought anyway. This is courtesy of this vintage clothing store. I keep forgetting the name of it. Flamboyant. Okay. You're amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Kate Sutherland. I proofread your most recent book recently for Book Hug, and it's so good. So thank you. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and don't touch your face.